Sarah Martinez sat quietly in the corner of the crowded coffee shop, her laptop open but her eyes scanning the room. She had learned long ago to always know her exits, to watch for unusual behavior, to trust her instincts. Today felt different, though. Today she was just another customer trying to blend in with the morning rush. The woman at the table next to her was talking loudly on her phone about her son's soccer practice. A businessman near the window typed furiously on his tablet, occasionally glancing at his watch. Everything seemed normal, almost boring. This was exactly what Sarah had wanted when she moved to this small town in Oregon 6 months ago. She had chosen Millbrook because it was the kind of place where nothing exciting ever happened. The biggest news in the local paper was usually about the annual pie contest or road construction delays. After 15 years of living in shadows, of never knowing if today would be her last, Sarah craved this ordinary life. Her phone buzzed with a text from her neighbor asking if she could water their plants while they were out of town. Sarah smiled and typed back a simple yes. These were the kinds of problems she enjoyed solving now. No encrypted messages, no emergency extractions, no life or death decisions. Just normal neighbor favors. The coffee shop door chimed as someone entered, and Sarah's training kicked in automatically. She noted the newcomer without looking directly at them. Middle-aged man, casual clothes, no obvious weapons. Her shoulders relaxed when he simply ordered a latte and sat down with a newspaper. Sarah had worked hard to suppress these automatic responses over the past months. Her therapist, Dr. Chen, had explained that it would take time for her nervous system to understand that she was truly safe now. The hypervigilance that had kept her alive in hostile territories would fade eventually, but healing wasn't linear. She closed her laptop and gathered her things. Her shift at the local library started in 20 minutes, and she didn't want to be late. The job was perfect for her new life. Quiet, predictable, and it gave her access to information without raising suspicions. Not that she needed intelligence anymore, but old habits were hard to break. Walking down Main Street, Sarah passed the same shops she had grown familiar with over the past months. Peterson's Hardware, where old Mr. Peterson always waved from behind the counter. The flower shop run by twins who finished each other's sentences. The diner where everyone seemed to know everyone else's business. At first, this level of community closeness had made her nervous. In her previous life, being noticed was dangerous. But gradually, she had come to appreciate how the townspeople looked out for each other. When Mrs. Holloway had fallen on the ice last winter, half the neighborhood had shown up with soup and offers to shovel her driveway. The library was housed in a beautiful old brick building that had been the town hall in the 1800s. Sarah loved the high ceilings, the tall windows, and the smell of old books mixed with fresh coffee from the small cafe in the corner. It felt like a sanctuary, which was fitting since it had become exactly that for her. Her colleague Jenny was already behind the circulation desk, checking in returned books. Jenny was 23, fresh out of library school and full of enthusiasm for community programming. She had tried several times to convince Sarah to help with the monthly book club, but Sarah always found polite ways to decline. Group gatherings still made her uncomfortable. "Morning, Sarah," Jenny called out cheerfully. "Did you see the email about the new security system they're installing next week?" Sarah had seen the email and she had mixed feelings about it. Part of her appreciated additional security measures, while another part worried about cameras and access logs. Even though she had no reason to hide anymore, transparency still felt foreign. The morning passed peacefully with the usual routine of helping patrons find books, processing returns, and updating the computer system. Sarah found genuine satisfaction in connecting people with information they needed, whether it was a recipe for apple pie or research for a high school history project. Around noon, a woman Sarah didn't recognize approached the reference desk. She was tall, athletic-looking, with short blonde hair and observant eyes. Something about her posture seemed familiar, but Sarah couldn't place where she might have seen her before. "Excuse me," the woman said, her voice carrying a slight accent Sarah couldn't identify. "I'm looking for information about local hiking trails. Something challenging, off the beaten path." Sarah pulled out a detailed map of the area and began explaining the various trail options. As she spoke, she noticed the woman watching her carefully, as if studying her responses. It was the kind of attention that would have set off alarm bells in her previous life. But Sarah reminded herself that she was overthinking things. "Thank you," the woman said when Sarah finished explaining the trails. You seem to know this area very well. Have you lived here long? About 6 months, Sarah replied, keeping her tone friendly but not overly informative. I moved here from the East Coast for a change of pace. The woman nodded and took the map, but she didn't leave immediately. Instead, she seemed to be waiting for something, or perhaps deciding whether to say more. Sarah felt that familiar tension in her shoulders, the one Dr. Chen had told her to notice and breathe through. Well, thank you for your help, the woman finally said, tucking the map into her jacket pocket. Maybe I'll see you around town. After she left, Sarah tried to shake off the uneasy feeling that had settled in her stomach. She told herself that newcomers often asked detailed questions about the area, and that the woman's interest was perfectly normal. But as she went back to her work, she couldn't stop thinking about the way the stranger had moved, the way she had positioned herself to see both the entrance and exit while they talked. The rest of the afternoon passed without incident, but Sarah found herself watching the door more carefully than usual. When 5 o'clock arrived, she was grateful to close up and head home to her small apartment above the bakery on Elm Street. Tomorrow would bring a fresh start, and hopefully, her paranoid thoughts would settle down with a good night's sleep. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor to the library. Agent Marcus Webb stood in the doorway, his federal credentials clearly visible in his wallet. Sarah's blood ran cold as she recognized the official stance, the way he scanned the room before approaching her desk. This was exactly what she had been hoping to avoid. Ms. Martinez, he said in a low voice, I need to speak with you privately. Jenny looked up from her computer with curiosity, but Sarah managed to keep her expression neutral. Of course. We can use the meeting room in the back. As they walked toward the small conference room, Sarah's mind raced through possibilities. Had someone from her past found her? Was there a new threat she needed to know about? Or worse, was her cover blown and her peaceful life about to end? Agent Webb closed the door behind them and took a seat across from her at the wooden table. He was younger than she had expected, probably in his early 30s, with the kind of serious demeanor that came with handling classified information. 3 days ago, a former CIA operative named Elena Volkov was found dead in Seattle. He began without preamble. She had your current address written on a piece of paper in her hotel room. Sarah felt her carefully constructed world beginning to shift. Elena Volkov had been her handler during 2 particularly dangerous missions in Eastern Europe. They had worked together closely, trusted each other with their lives. The news of her death hit harder than Sarah had expected. I'm sorry to hear that, Sarah said carefully, but I'm not sure why you're telling me this. I work at a library now. Agent Webb pulled out a tablet and showed her a photograph. This was taken yesterday, about 2 hours after I arrived in town to investigate the connection. The image showed Sarah talking to the blonde woman at the reference desk. Sarah's stomach dropped as she realized the woman's questions about hiking trails had been much more calculated than she had thought. Who is she? Sarah asked. We don't know. She paid for her hotel room in cash, used a fake ID, and disappeared sometime during the night. The only clear image we have of her is this one from your library's security camera. Sarah studied the photograph more carefully. Now that she knew to look for it, she could see the subtle signs she had missed the day before. The way the woman held her shoulders, the calculated positioning, the fact that she had asked specific questions designed to test Sarah's knowledge of the area. What do you want from me? Sarah asked. Elena Volkov was killed execution style. Professional work. Before she died, she managed to send a single encrypted message to her emergency contact. It contained 2 words, Sarah Martinez. The room felt smaller suddenly, and Sarah fought the urge to check the exits. She had left that life behind specifically to avoid situations like this. But it seemed that life wasn't ready to let her go. I've been out for 6 months, Sarah said. I don't know what Elena wanted to tell me, and I don't know who might be looking for either of us. Agent Webb leaned forward. Here's what we do know. Elena had been investigating a black market arms dealer named Viktor Kozlov. She believed he was planning something big, something that would require inside knowledge of classified operations. Sarah knew the name. Viktor Kozlov had been on their watch list for years, but he had always managed to stay one step ahead of law enforcement. He was smart, well-connected, and absolutely ruthless. You think Elena discovered something about Kozlov's plans and came here to warn me? Sarah asked. That's our working theory. The question is, what did she know, and why did she think you specifically needed to be warned? Before Sarah could respond, her phone buzzed with a text message. The number was unfamiliar, but the message made her blood run cold. The hiking trails here are lovely this time of year. Perhaps we could explore them together soon. A fellow outdoors enthusiast. She showed the message to Agent Webb, who immediately stood up and moved toward the window to scan the street outside. "We need to get you somewhere safe," he said. "This is supposed to be somewhere safe," Sarah replied. But even as she said it, she knew how naive that sounded. She had been trained better than anyone that safety was an illusion, especially for people with her background. "Pack light and pack fast," Agent Webb said. "I have a safe house about 2 hours from here. We can figure out our next move from there." Sarah felt the familiar weight of decision settling on her shoulders. She could refuse, insist on staying and trying to handle this herself. But Elena was dead, and whoever had killed her knew exactly where to find Sarah. The blonde woman had been scouting, testing her defenses, and now they were making their move. "Give me 10 minutes, she said. Walking back through the library felt surreal. Jenny looked up with concern as Sarah approached her desk. "I have a family emergency," Sarah said, hating how easily the lie came to her lips. "I need to take some time off, maybe a week or two." "Of course," Jenny said immediately. "I hope everything's okay. Don't worry about anything here, I can handle it." Sarah gathered her personal items from her desk drawer, including the small emergency kit she had hidden behind her reference books. Old habits die hard, and she was grateful now for her paranoia. As she walked toward the back exit with Agent Webb, Sarah caught sight of a dark sedan parked across the street. The windows were tinted and she couldn't see inside, but something about it felt wrong. She pointed it out to Agent Webb, who nodded grimly. "Back exit now," he said quietly. They moved quickly through the library's rear corridor and out into the alley behind the building. Agent Webb's car was parked 2 blocks away, and they walked at a normal pace to avoid drawing attention. But Sarah could feel eyes on them, and she knew their window of opportunity was closing fast. "Once we're in the car, I need you to tell me everything you remember about your last mission with Elena," Agent Webb said as they reached his vehicle. "Something happened then that's connected to what's happening now." Sarah slid into the passenger seat and looked back at the library one last time. 6 months of peace, 6 months of pretending to be someone else, and it was over just like that. As they drove out of Millbrook, she began sorting through memories she had tried hard to forget, searching for the connection that had gotten Elena killed and put her own life in danger once again. The rearview mirror showed the dark sedan pulling out behind them, maintaining a careful distance. Sarah's brief experiment with normal life was officially over. The safe house was a modest cabin tucked away in the mountains, surrounded by dense pine forest. Agent Webb had taken a winding route to get there, making several stops to ensure they weren't being followed. The dark sedan had disappeared after the first hour, but Sarah knew that didn't necessarily mean they were safe. Inside the cabin, Webb set up his laptop and established a secure connection to his headquarters. Sarah sat at the kitchen table, forcing herself to relive memories she had spent months trying to suppress. "The mission in Prague was supposed to be routine surveillance," she began. "Elena and I were tracking a suspected arms trafficking operation. We had intelligence that suggested Viktor Kozlov was meeting with potential buyers." Webb looked up from his computer. "What kind of buyers?" "That was the problem. Our intelligence was incomplete. We knew there was a meeting, but we didn't know who was attending or what they were planning to purchase." Sarah closed her eyes and let the memories flow back. The cold October night in Prague, the rain-slicked streets, the cramped surveillance position in an abandoned building across from Kozlov's hotel. She and Elena had taken shifts watching the entrance, documenting everyone who went in and out. "On the second night, we saw something unexpected," Sarah continued. 3 men arrived separately, all within an hour of each other. Elena recognized one of them immediately. Who was it? David Morrison. He was supposed to be dead. Webb's fingers stopped moving on his keyboard. David Morrison had been a CIA operative who had allegedly been killed in a bombing in Kabul 3 years earlier. His death had been verified through dental records, and his family had received full military honors at his funeral. Elena was certain it was him, Webb asked. Absolutely. She had worked with Morrison for 5 years before his supposed death. She knew his walk, his mannerisms, everything. There was no doubt in her mind. Sarah remembered the shock on Elena's face when she had seen Morrison walking into the hotel. They had both known what his presence meant. If Morrison was alive and meeting with Viktor Kozlov, Then either his death had been faked as part of a deep cover operation, or he had gone rogue and was selling classified information. What did you do? Elena wanted to go in immediately, to confront Morrison and demand answers. But I convinced her to wait, to gather more intelligence before we acted. It had been a heated discussion. Elena's loyalty to her former partner had warred with her professional training. In the end, they had decided to maintain surveillance and report their findings to headquarters before taking any action. That was when things went wrong, Sarah said. The third night of surveillance had started normally. They had documented the arrival of 2 more suspicious individuals, including a woman they later identified as a known weapons broker from Bulgaria. The meeting appeared to be significant, with high-level players from multiple criminal organizations. Around midnight, Elena had been monitoring communications when she intercepted an encrypted transmission. She had managed to decrypt only part of it, but what she found had made her go pale. She heard Morrison's voice on that transmission, Sarah said. He was giving detailed information about planned CIA operations in the region. Locations, agent identities, operational timelines, everything. Webb swore softly. Morrison was selling out active operations? It was worse than that. Elena realized that Morrison had access to information he shouldn't have had. Details about operations that had been planned after his supposed death. Someone with current high-level access was feeding him intelligence. The implications had been staggering. Not only was a supposedly dead agent working with international criminals, but there was also a mole somewhere high up in the CIA hierarchy. Elena had immediately tried to contact her handler, but their communication channels had been compromised. That's when the shooting started, Sarah said. She remembered the sound of breaking glass, the muzzle flashes in the darkness, the urgent need to destroy their equipment before it could be captured. Someone had discovered their surveillance position, and the extraction had turned into a running firefight through the streets of Prague. Elena and I got separated during the escape. Sarah continued. I made it to the extraction point, but she didn't. I waited as long as I could, but our backup arrived and ordered an immediate withdrawal. Webb looked up from his notes. What happened to Elena? She turned up 3 days later at the embassy. She claimed she had been captured and interrogated, but that she had managed to escape. Her story checked out and the medical examination confirmed she had been tortured. Sarah paused, remembering the relief she had felt when Elena had walked into the embassy safe house. Her partner had been bruised and exhausted but alive. They had debriefed separately, filed their reports, and been sent home for recovery leave. But you don't think that's what really happened, Webb said. I wasn't sure then, but now. Sarah shook her head. Elena's encrypted message before she died mentioned my name specifically. If she had been captured and tortured, why wouldn't she have given them my location then? Why wait 6 months to warn me? Webb's phone rang, interrupting their conversation. He answered it quickly, speaking in code phrases that Sarah recognized from her own operational days. When he hung up, his expression was grim. We have a problem, he said. Elena's hotel room in Seattle was searched again last night. Whoever killed her is still looking for something, and they're not giving up. Sarah felt the familiar chill of approaching danger. What were they looking for? We think Elena managed to hide something before she was killed. Evidence of what she discovered in Prague, maybe proof of the mole's identity. And they think I might know where it is? Or they think you might be the only person who can interpret whatever Elena found. Sarah's phone buzzed with another text message. This time it was from a different number. Your friend Elena was very stubborn. We hope you'll be more cooperative. Check your email. With shaking hands, Sarah opened her email app. There was a new message with no subject line and no sender name. The message contained a single photograph, Elena's body in the Seattle hotel room, with a note pinned to her chest that Sarah couldn't quite read from the image. They're sending a message, Webb said grimly. They want you to know this isn't over. Sarah stared at the photograph, feeling anger building alongside her fear. Elena had been a good agent and a better friend. She had died trying to protect classified information and warned Sarah about whatever danger was coming. I need to see Elena's personal effects, Sarah said. If she hid something, if she left me a message, I'll be able to find it. Webb nodded. I was hoping you'd say that. But first, we need to talk about protection. These people have already killed one agent, and they're clearly not afraid to come after another. I can take care of myself, Sarah said automatically. I know you can, but this time you won't have to do it alone. As if on cue, Sarah heard the sound of vehicles approaching the cabin. Webb stood up and moved to the window, then relaxed slightly. Back up, he explained. It's time to stop running and start fighting back. 3 black SUVs pulled up to the cabin, and Sarah watched as a tactical team emerged. These weren't regular federal agents. Their movements were too precise, their equipment too specialized. Sarah recognized the signs of a black ops unit, the kind of team that handled the most sensitive and dangerous operations. The team leader was a woman in her 40s with steel gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. She introduced herself simply as Commander Brooks and immediately began setting up a secure perimeter around the cabin. Sarah noticed that Brooks carried herself with the confidence of someone who had seen combat in multiple theaters. Agent Webb has briefed me on the situation, Brooks said as her team finished their setup. We've been tracking Viktor Kozlov's organization for the past 18 months. Your intelligence from Prague was the missing piece we needed to understand his operation. Sarah felt a mix of relief and apprehension. It was good to know that Elena's sacrifice hadn't been in vain, but the presence of a black ops team suggested the situation was more serious than she had realized. What do you know about Morrison? Sarah asked. David Morrison is very much alive, Brooks confirmed. After his supposed death in Kabul, he was recruited for a deep cover operation. His mission was to infiltrate Kozlov's organization and gather intelligence on their weapons trafficking networks. Sarah felt pieces of the puzzle beginning to fit together. But something went wrong. Morrison went dark 6 months ago. No contact, no status reports, nothing. We assumed he had been discovered and killed. Now we know he turned. Brooks pulled out a tablet and showed Sarah a series of surveillance photographs. Morrison was clearly visible in several images, meeting with known criminals and arms dealers. In one particularly damning photo, he was shaking hands with Viktor Kozlov himself. Morrison has been feeding Kozlov information about our operations, Brooks continued. 3 of our agents have been killed because of intelligence he provided. Several major weapons shipments that we were tracking have mysteriously disappeared. Sarah studied the photographs, trying to reconcile the man she saw with the dedicated agent Elena had known. Something about the situation still didn't feel right. If Morrison turned, why was Elena killed? Sarah asked. She was no longer actively investigating the case. Because Elena discovered something that could expose not just Morrison, but the entire mole network, Agent Webb said. During her 3 days of captivity in Prague, she wasn't being tortured for information. She was being recruited. The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. Elena was working with them. We think Morrison tried to flip her, Brooks said. He probably offered her money, protection, maybe even threatened people she cared about. But Elena played along just long enough to gather evidence of the entire operation. Sarah's mind raced as she processed this new information. Elena's behavior after Prague suddenly made more sense. Her partner had been quieter, more secretive, working longer hours on classified projects. Sarah had assumed it was trauma from her capture, but now she realized Elena had been conducting her own investigation. What evidence did she gather? Sarah asked. That's what we need to find out, Brooks said. Elena was careful. She knew that if she made her suspicions known through official channels, the mole network would be alerted. So she gathered evidence quietly, planning to expose them all at once. Webb's laptop chimed with an incoming message. He read it quickly, then looked up with concern. Elena's apartment in Virginia was broken into last night, he reported. Whoever searched it was thorough. They knew exactly what they were looking for. But they didn't find it, Sarah said with sudden understanding. Elena was too smart to hide evidence where they could easily find it. Brooks nodded, which is why they need you. Elena trusted you more than anyone. If she left a message or hidden evidence, you're the most likely person to know how to find it. Sarah's phone buzzed again. This time it was a phone call from an unknown number. Brooks nodded for her to answer, and her team immediately began tracing the call. Hello, Sarah, said a familiar voice. David Morrison sounded older, more tired than she remembered, but it was definitely him. David? Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady. Elena told me you were dead. Elena told you a lot of things. Not all of them were true. Sarah could hear traffic in the background, suggesting Morrison was calling from a vehicle. Brooks's team was frantically working to trace the signal, but Sarah knew Morrison was too experienced to stay on the line long enough for them to get a location. "What do you want?" Sarah asked. "I want what Elena promised me before she decided to get heroic," Morrison said. "She found something in Prague that belongs to me. I want it back." "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't play games, Sarah." Elena was very clear about who she trusted with her secrets. "You have 24 hours to find what she hid and bring it to me. Otherwise, your peaceful little life in Oregon becomes very unpeaceful very quickly." The line went dead before Sarah could respond. Brooks's team leader looked up from his equipment and shook his head. The call had been too short to trace. "He's getting desperate," Brooks observed. "That's good news and bad news. Good because desperate people make mistakes. Bad because they also become more dangerous." Sarah stood up and began pacing the small cabin. Elena had trusted her with something important, but what? They had worked together for years, shared countless secrets and inside jokes. If Elena had wanted to leave her a message, where would she hide it? "I need to see Elena's personal effects," Sarah said. "Everything from her hotel room, her apartment, her office. There has to be something I'm missing." Brooks nodded to Agent Webb, who began making phone calls to arrange access to Elena's belongings. While he worked, Sarah tried to think like her former partner. Elena had been methodical, careful, always thinking 3 steps ahead. She wouldn't have left crucial evidence somewhere obvious, but she also wouldn't have made it impossible for Sarah to find. "There's something else you should know," Brooks said quietly. "We've identified the blonde woman from the library. Her name is Katerina Volkov. She's Viktor Kozlov's daughter and his primary enforcer." Sarah felt her blood run cold. Katerina Volkov was known throughout intelligence circles as one of the most skilled and ruthless operatives in the criminal underworld. If she was personally involved in hunting for Elena's evidence, then whatever Elena had discovered was worth killing for. "How long do we have?" Sarah asked. "Morrison gave you 24 hours, Brooks replied. "But Katerina won't wait that long. She's probably already moving to intercept us." As if summoned by their conversation, one of Brooks's team members approached with an urgent expression. "Commander, we have movement on the perimeter, 3 vehicles approaching from different directions. They're not trying to hide their approach." Brooks immediately switched into combat mode, issuing orders to her team with crisp efficiency. Sarah felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with imminent danger, but this time it was mixed with determination. Elena had died protecting something important, and Sarah wasn't going to let her sacrifice be in vain. "We need to move," Brooks said. "Now." The evacuation from the cabin happened with military precision. Brooks's team moved like they had rehearsed this exact scenario dozens of times. Sarah found herself in the middle vehicle of their convoy, sandwiched between 2 heavily armed agents. As they raced down mountain roads toward their next destination, "Where are we going?" Sarah asked Agent Webb, who was coordinating with headquarters through an encrypted communication system. "Seattle," he replied. "Elena's personal effects are being moved to a secure facility there. We'll have access to everything she left behind." Sarah looked out the rear window and saw their pursuers maintaining a steady distance. 3 black cars, professional spacing, no attempt to catch up or attack. They were being herded, Sarah realized. Whoever was following them wanted to know where they were going. "They're not trying to stop us," she told Brooks through the radio system. "I know," Brooks replied from the lead vehicle. "They want us to lead them to Elena's evidence, which means we're going to give them exactly what they want." Sarah didn't like the sound of that, but she trusted Brooks's tactical experience. The convoy continued through winding mountain roads for another hour before reaching a small regional airport. An unmarked jet was waiting on the tarmac, engines already running. The transfer happened quickly. Sarah barely had time to register the change from car to aircraft before they were airborne, leaving their pursuers stranded on the ground. But as Seattle came into view 3 hours later, Sarah could see several black vehicles already positioned around the airfield where they were landing. "How did they get here so fast?" she asked. "They have resources," Brooks said grimly. "Morrison has been feeding them intelligence for months. They know our procedures, our safe houses, maybe even our personnel files. The plane taxied to a private hangar, where another tactical team was waiting. Sarah noticed that this group was larger and more heavily armed than the previous one. Whatever they were walking into, Brooks was taking no chances. Elena's personal effects had been arranged on tables in a secure warehouse facility. Sarah felt a stab of grief as she looked at the familiar items. Elena's leather jacket, the one she had worn on countless missions. Her watch, a gift from her grandmother. Personal photos, books, jewelry, the physical remnants of a life cut short. "Take your time," Brooks said gently. "Look for anything that seems out of place, anything that might contain a hidden message." Sarah began methodically examining each item. Elena had been fond of puzzles and word games, often leaving coded messages in seemingly innocent items. Sarah checked the books for marked passages, examined the jewelry for hidden compartments, looked through the photographs for background details that might be significant. After 2 hours, she had found nothing obvious. Frustrated, Sarah sat down and tried to think differently. Elena had known she was in danger, but she had also known that her belongings would be searched by professionals. Where would she hide? Something that only Sarah would recognize? "Can I see her phone?" Sarah asked. Agent Webb handed her Elena's smartphone, which had been wiped clean by their technical team. But Sarah wasn't interested in the data. She was interested in the phone case, a brightly colored protective cover that Elena had bought during their mission in Bangkok 2 years earlier. Sarah examined the case carefully and found what she was looking for. A tiny puncture hole near the charging port, so small it looked like normal wear. But Sarah remembered Elena making that hole deliberately, using it to hide micro SD cards during sensitive operations. Using a paperclip, Sarah carefully extracted a tiny memory card from the hidden compartment. Her hands were shaking as she handed it to the technical team. "This is it," she said. "This is what Elena wanted me to find." The technical specialist immediately connected the card to a secure computer system. The files it contained were encrypted, but Elena had used a key that Sarah recognized immediately. It was based on a poem they had memorized together during training, combined with the coordinates of their first successful mission. As the files decrypted, the room fell silent. Elena had been thorough in her investigation. The memory card contained photographs, audio recordings, financial records, and detailed notes about the entire mole network. There were at least 6 CIA operatives involved, including 2 senior administrators who had access to the highest levels of classified information. But the most damning evidence was a series of recorded conversations between Morrison and Victor Kozlov. In crystal-clear audio, Morrison could be heard providing details about planned operations, agent identities, and security protocols. He wasn't just selling information. He was actively helping plan attacks on American assets. "My God," Agent Webb whispered as he reviewed the financial records. "They've moved millions of dollars through offshore accounts. This isn't just about weapons trafficking. They're funding terrorist operations." Sarah continued scrolling through Elena's files and found something that made her blood run cold. A planned attack on a CIA training facility in Virginia, scheduled for the following week. Morrison had provided detailed floor plans, security, schedules, and the identities of agents who would be present. "We have to stop this," Sarah said. "We will," Brooks replied. "But first we need to get this information to headquarters securely. If the mole network realizes what we've found, they'll accelerate their timeline or disappear entirely." As if summoned by her words, the warehouse lights suddenly went out. Emergency lighting kicked in a moment later, bathing everything in an eerie red glow. Brooks immediately activated her radio. "Perimeter teams report," she commanded. The responses came back quickly, and none of them were good. The warehouse was surrounded. Professional teams had moved into position while they were focused on Elena's evidence. Sarah could hear vehicles outside, the sound of boots on concrete, the click of weapons being readied. "How many?" Brooks asked. "At least 20, possibly more. They have the building completely contained." Sarah felt the familiar weight of combat decision-making settling over her. But this time, the stakes were higher than just her own survival. Elena's evidence had to reach headquarters, or dozens of American agents would die in the planned attack. "Is there another way out?" Sarah asked. Brooks consulted a blueprint of the warehouse. "Loading dock on the north side, but they'll have it covered. What about the roof? Possible, but it's a 40-foot drop to the next building. Sarah smiled grimly. I've made worse jumps. Before Brooks could object, Sarah's phone rang. Morrison's number appeared on the screen. You found it? He said without preamble. Elena's little insurance policy. I'm impressed. The evidence is already on its way to headquarters, Sarah lied. Morrison laughed. No, it's not. But it will be soon. Bring the memory card outside and everyone walks away. Refuse, and we come in shooting. And if I give you the evidence, you'll just let us go? Sarah, you always were too trusting, Morrison said. Elena thought she was protecting you by gathering that evidence. Instead, she signed both your death warrants. The line went dead, and Sarah looked at Brooks with determination. They're not planning to let anyone walk away. Brooks nodded grimly. Then we go with the roof option. My team will create a distraction while you get that evidence to safety. I'm not leaving you here to die, Sarah protested. You're not. We're professionals, and this is what we do. But that evidence is worth more than all our lives combined. If Morrison's network succeeds with their planned attack, hundreds of innocent people will die. Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders once again. This was exactly the kind of life or death decision she had hoped to leave behind when she moved to Millbrook. But Elena's sacrifice had pulled her back into a world where every choice could mean the difference between life and death for countless others. How long do you need? Sarah asked. Give us 5 minutes to get into position, Brooks replied. When you hear the fireworks start, go for the roof access. Don't look back and don't stop until you reach the federal building downtown. Sarah pocketed the memory card and began making her way toward the warehouse's upper level. Behind her, Brooks's team was preparing for what they all knew might be their final mission. Sarah tried not to think about the odds they were facing as she climbed the stairs to the roof access. The sound of gunfire erupted from below just as Sarah reached the roof access door. Brooks's team had begun their diversionary attack, drawing Morrison's forces toward the main entrance of the warehouse. Sarah could hear shouting, the crash of breaking glass and the steady rhythm of automatic weapons fire. She pushed open the heavy metal door and stepped onto the roof. The Seattle skyline stretched out before her, but Sarah's attention was focused on the adjacent building 40 feet away. It was lower than the warehouse roof, which would help with the landing, but the gap was still wider than any jump she had attempted in training. Sarah backed up to get a running start, then stopped as she heard footsteps on the stairs behind her. Someone had discovered her escape route. She looked around desperately for another option and spotted a maintenance ladder leading down the side of the building. The ladder was old and rusty, but it might be her only chance. Sarah swung over the edge of the roof and began climbing down as quickly as she dared. Above her, she could hear voices and the sound of the roof access door being kicked open. 20 feet down, Sarah heard the distinctive whistle of a bullet passing close to her head. They had found her. She abandoned caution and slid down the ladder, using her hands and feet to control her descent. The metal rungs tore at her palms, but she couldn't afford to slow down. When she was still 10 feet from the ground, Sarah heard the ladder groaning under additional weight. Someone was following her down. She let go and dropped the remaining distance, rolling to absorb the impact as she hit the alley pavement. Sarah looked up to see Katerina Volkov descending the ladder with fluid grace. Even in the dim light of the alley, Sarah could see the cold intelligence in the other woman's eyes. This wasn't going to be a conversation. Elena was a fool, Katerina said as she dropped lightly to the ground. She thought she could play games with my father's organization and walk away. Elena was trying to stop a terrorist attack, Sarah replied, backing toward the mouth of the alley. Elena was trying to protect a system that never protected her, Katerina countered. Do you know how many agents your precious CIA has abandoned when they became inconvenient? How many operations they've sacrificed to protect their political interests? Sarah didn't have time for a philosophical debate. She could hear the gunfight continuing inside the warehouse, but she knew Brooks's team couldn't hold out much longer. The evidence in her pocket was the only thing that could stop Morrison's planned attack and expose the entire mole network. The memory card, Katerina said, extending her hand. Give it to me and I'll make your death quick. That's very generous, Sarah said, but I think I'll keep it. Katerina smiled and pulled a knife from her jacket. The blade was long and curved, designed for close combat. Sarah recognized the weapon type from her training, efficient, silent, and deadly in skilled hands. Sarah reached behind her back and drew her own weapon, a standard-issue pistol that Agent Webb had provided at the safe house. But as she raised it, Katerina was already moving. The blonde woman closed the distance between them with frightening speed, and Sarah barely managed to dodge the first knife thrust. The fight moved up and down the narrow alley as both women used their training and experience. Katerina was faster and more agile, but Sarah had the advantage of desperation. She couldn't afford to lose, not with so many lives hanging in the balance. Sarah managed to land a solid kick to Katerina's ribs, sending the other woman stumbling backward. But before she could follow up with her pistol, Katerina threw the knife with deadly accuracy. Sarah twisted away, but the blade caught her shoulder, sending a wave of pain down her arm. "You're bleeding," Katerina observed with satisfaction. "How long do you think you can keep this up?" Sarah could feel blood soaking through her shirt, but the wound wasn't deep enough to stop her. She retrieved Katerina's knife from where it had fallen and now faced her opponent with two weapons. "Long enough," Sarah said. The sound of police sirens was growing louder in the distance. Someone had called in the gunfight at the warehouse, and Seattle PD was responding in force. Sarah knew that help was coming, but she also knew that Katerina wouldn't give up until one of them was dead. Katerina rushed forward again, but this time, Sarah was ready. She stepped aside and used Katerina's momentum against her, sending the blonde woman crashing into the brick wall of the alley. Before Katerina could recover, Sarah had her pistol pressed against the back of her head. "It's over," Sarah said. "Is it?" Katerina asked. "Even if you kill me, even if you deliver that evidence, do you really think it will end here? My father has resources you can't imagine. Contacts in governments around the world. This is just the beginning." Sarah felt the truth in those words. Exposing Morrison's network would be a significant victory, but Viktor Kozlov's organization would continue operating. There would be other moles, other attacks, other innocent people in danger, but that wasn't her problem anymore. Sarah had left the intelligence world to escape exactly this kind of endless cycle of violence and retribution. Elena's evidence would save lives and bring justice for her friend's death. "That was enough, maybe," Sarah said, "but it's not my fight anymore." The police sirens were very close now, and Sarah could see flashing lights at the end of the alley. She stepped back from Katerina, keeping her weapon trained on the other woman. "Don't move," Sarah commanded. Katerina smiled and slowly reached into her jacket. Sarah tensed, expecting another weapon, but instead Katerina pulled out a small device that looked like a garage door opener. "You might want to tell your friends to evacuate the warehouse," Katerina said. "I'd say they have about 30 seconds before the explosives go off." Sarah's blood ran cold. Brooks and her entire team were still inside the warehouse, along with Agent Webb and all of Elena's evidence except for the memory card in Sarah's pocket. "You're lying," Sarah said, but even as she spoke, she could see the truth in Katerina's eyes. 25 seconds, Katerina said cheerfully. Sarah faced an impossible choice. She could maintain her position and capture Katerina, or she could try to warn Brooks's team and risk letting a dangerous criminal escape. The decision took less than a second. Sarah turned and ran toward the warehouse, shouting into her radio as she moved. "Brooks, get everyone out now! The building is rigged to explode." Behind her, she heard Katerina's laughter echoing through the alley. When Sarah looked back, the blonde woman had vanished into the shadows like a ghost. But that was a problem for another day. Right now, Sarah had to save the people who had risked their lives to protect her. The warehouse was still echoing with gunfire as Sarah approached, but she could see Brooks's team beginning to evacuate through the main entrance. They had received her warning and were moving with the disciplined urgency of professionals who understood exactly how serious the threat was. Sarah reached the building just as Brooks emerged, supporting Agent Webb, who had taken a bullet in the leg. "How long?" Brooks asked tersely. "I don't know," Sarah admitted. "Maybe seconds." They were 50 yards from the warehouse when the explosives detonated. The blast wave knocked everyone to the ground and debris rained down around them. Sarah looked back to see the building collapsing in on itself, taking with it most of Elena's evidence and any chance of capturing Morrison's accomplices who had been inside. But the memory card was still safe in her pocket, and Brooks's entire team had survived the explosion. Elena's sacrifice hadn't been in vain, and the planned attack on the CIA training facility could still be prevented. As police and fire departments swarmed the scene, Sarah finally allowed herself to believe that the worst was over. Morrison's network would be exposed, justice would be served for Elena's death, and she could finally return to her quiet life in Millbrook. She was wrong about that last part. 3 weeks later, Sarah sat in a secure conference room at CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia. The memory card she had risked her life to recover had proven to be even more valuable than anyone had imagined. Elena's evidence had exposed not just Morrison's mole network, but an entire web of corruption that reached into multiple government agencies. The planned attack on the CIA training facility had been prevented, and 17 operatives working for Viktor Kozlov had been arrested in coordinated raids across 3 countries. Morrison himself was in federal custody, facing charges of treason, conspiracy, and multiple counts of murder. But Sarah's satisfaction at seeing justice served was tempered by a nagging sense that something was still wrong. Katerina Volkov had vanished without a trace, and Viktor Kozlov's main organization remained intact. The victory felt incomplete. "We couldn't have done this without you," Director Harrison said as he reviewed the final report. "Your actions saved dozens of lives and protected national security interests around the world." Sarah nodded politely, but she was already thinking about her return flight to Oregon. She had done her duty, honored Elena's memory, and helped bring down a network of traitors. Now she wanted to go back to her quiet life at the library. "There is one more thing," Director Harrison continued. "We'd like to offer you a position here at headquarters. Senior analyst, your own team, access to the most interesting cases we handle." It was exactly the kind of offer Sarah would have jumped at 5 years earlier. Prestige, responsibility, the chance to make a real difference in protecting her country. But that life had nearly gotten her killed multiple times, and she had seen too many good people like Elena pay the ultimate price. "Thank you, but no," Sarah said. "I'm retired, remember?" Director Harrison smiled. "Retirement is a relative concept in our business. You've proven that over the past few weeks." "This was personal," Sarah replied. "Elena was my partner and my friend. But it's over now." Director Harrison exchanged a glance with Commander Brooks, who had been sitting quietly during the meeting. Sarah noticed the look and felt a familiar chill of apprehension. "What aren't you telling me?" Sarah asked. Brooks slid a file folder across the table. "Katerina Volkov didn't disappear. She's been busy recruiting new assets and rebuilding her father's network. We've tracked her movements through 6 countries in the past 3 weeks." Sarah opened the folder and felt her heart sink. The surveillance photos showed Katerina meeting with known criminals, arms dealers, and suspected terrorists. She was clearly planning something big, and from the intelligence reports, it appeared to be targeted at American interests. "This isn't my problem anymore," Sarah said. But even as she spoke the words, she knew how hollow they sounded. "Look at the last page," Brooks said quietly. Sarah flipped to the final document in the folder and saw a photograph that made her blood run cold. It was a surveillance image taken outside the Millbrook Public Library. Katerina Volkov was standing on the sidewalk talking to Jenny, Sarah's young colleague. "She knows where you live," Brooks said. "She knows your routine, your friends, everyone you care about." "This won't end until she's stopped." Sarah stared at the photograph, thinking about Jenny's enthusiasm for community programs, her genuine kindness to library patrons, her complete innocence about the dangerous world that had suddenly invaded her small town. The idea of that bright young woman being hurt because of Sarah's past was unbearable. "What do you want me to do?" Sarah asked. "Help us find her," Director Harrison said. "You know how she thinks, how she operates. You've faced her in combat and survived. You're our best chance of stopping her before she strikes again." Sarah closed the folder and leaned back in her chair. She had spent 6 months trying to convince herself that she could leave her old life behind, that she could be just another small-town librarian with no connection to the world of international espionage and deadly conspiracies. But Elena's death had proved that the past never really stayed buried. And now Katerina's interest in her quiet life in Oregon meant that innocent people were in danger because of choices Sarah had made years earlier. "If I do this," Sarah said, "I do it my way. No bureaucratic oversight, no political considerations, just the mission." "Agreed," Director Harrison said immediately. "And when it's over, when Katerina is dead or captured, I want guarantees. New identity, new location, whatever it takes to make sure this really is finished." Brooks nodded. "We can arrange that." Sarah stood up and walked to the window overlooking the Virginia countryside. Somewhere out there, Katerina Volkov was planning an attack that could kill dozens of innocent people, and somewhere in Oregon, Jenny was probably shelving books and planning the next library book club, completely unaware that she had become a target in a war she knew nothing about. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. "I'll need a full tactical team," Sarah said without turning around, "and I want access to Elena's complete files. Everything she gathered about Viktor Kozlov's organization." "Done," Director Harrison said. "And I want to know everything you have about Morrison's interrogation. If he's given up any information about Katerina's plans or whereabouts." "Morrison hasn't talked," Brooks admitted. "But we're working on it." Sarah finally turned back to face them. "Then I guess I'll have to convince him to start talking." The meeting ended with handshakes and promises of support. But Sarah knew that once she walked out of that conference room, she would be walking back into a world where every day could be her last. The peaceful life she had tried to build in Millbrook was over. Probably forever. But as she thought about Elena's sacrifice, about the innocent people who would die if Katerina succeeded in her plans, and about Jenny's trusting smile, Sarah knew she was making the right choice. Some fights were worth having, no matter what they cost. 3 days later, Sarah was on a plane to Eastern Europe, following the first lead in what would become her final hunt for Katerina Volkov. She carried no personal belongings except for a small photo of Elena and a library card from Millbrook Public Library. The card would remind her of what she was fighting to protect. The photo would remind her of what she had already lost. As the plane climbed into the night sky, Sarah pulled out the mission briefing and began studying intelligence reports about Katerina's recent activities. Somewhere in those pages was the information she needed to end this once and for all. The quiet librarian from Oregon was gone. Sarah Martinez, CIA operative, was back in the field where she belonged. And this time, she wasn't planning to come back until the job was finished. The war between Sarah and Katerina Volkov was about to begin in earnest, and only one of them would survive to see its end. Sarah intended to make sure it was her,